In the haze of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, beneath the colourful marquees and the intoxicating smell of popcorn, a unique form of entertainment drew crowds like moths to a flame, the enigmatic world of freak shows. Giants, dwarfs, and human oddities like Joseph Merrick, commonly known as the Elephant Man, found themselves displayed in circus tents and dime museums across America and Europe. Managed by figures like P.T. Barnum, whose name has become synonymous with showmanship and spectacle, these venues promise to showcase the extraordinary and unbelievable. But have you ever paused to consider the darker hues that tint this ostensibly colourful spectacle? And what was life like for those who stood under the spotlight, their bodies and lives exposed as freakish attractions? As we venture into this captivating yet often unsettling realm, let us heed the cautionary words of Victor Hugo. Laughter is the sun that drives winter from the human face. It prompts us to ponder, was the laughter conjured by freak shows a warm sun or a freezing chill for those who found themselves its subjects? Join us as we dissect the allure, the controversies, and the undeniable impact of freak shows on our collective understanding of humanity and otherness. Welcome to the Diary of Julius Caesar. The tapestry of oddities, how England's courts and countrysides birthed the freak show. In a time where public executions doubled as family outings and bear baiting was considered high entertainment, the arrival of the freak show in the 16th century English landscape seemed like the next logical step in a nation's thirst for the unusual. Picture this. You're strolling through a bustling Elizabethan fair in 1589, and between the jester's antics and the minstrel's melodies, you encounter a tent with a sign that proclaims "Wonders of Nature, Curiosities of God's Own Making." Your curiosity piqued, you decide to step inside. Here, you would have seen collections of the strange and the bizarre, from bearded women to human monstrosities, as they were called then, and even exotic animals like monkeys dressed in tiny suits. Even in this early period, these shows were as much about storytelling as spectacle. Showmen, often gifted orators themselves, would craft elaborate backstories for their performers. A dwarf might be presented as a fallen nobleman, cursed by witchcraft. A person with physical deformities might be spun as a wild man, captured from savage lands. The practice was not confined to the rural fairgrounds. The court of Queen Elizabeth herself hosted performers with unique physical traits. Take, for example, the much-celebrated visit of a certain hairy girl in the late 16th century, whose rare condition, hypertrichosis, left her covered from head to toe in thick hair. She became a subject of fascination among the elite, as her otherness was twisted into a form of exoticism. It's no coincidence that Richard Burbage, the famous actor and associate of William Shakespeare, found his own fascination with the unique human conditions often presented in these shows. You might argue that the bard's Caliban from The Tempest drew inspiration from such exhibitions. As the years rolled on into the 17th century, the concept found fertile ground to grow, while the English Civil War brought a certain sobriety to public life. The Restoration period brought back the appetite for the extravagant. Samuel Pepys, the noted diarist, wrote about visiting a freak show in 1668 where he saw a dwarf who stood not more than 18 inches high and yet was 17 years old. His observation is one of the earliest accounts that underscore how deeply ingrained these shows had become in English culture by the latter half of the 17th century. Yet the phenomenon was not without its critics. Thomas Hobbes famously derided the public's fascination with novelties and monstrosities, questioning the societal thirst for the unusual over the rationale. However, this was a period that equally cherished the writings of René Descartes, whose philosophical investigations into the nature of existence might be seen as an intellectual counterpart to the freak show's probing of the boundaries of human experience. As the Enlightenment dawned, a new era of scientific curiosity began to overshadow the dark carnival aspect of freak shows. Scholars and physicians began to examine these human oddities with clinical interest, hoping to categorize and understand the anomalies of nature. However, this by no means signaled the end of the freak show. Instead, it evolved. Showmen started to incorporate pseudo-scientific explanations to add a veneer of respectability to their displays, appealing to both the sense of wonder and the intellect of their audience. So, the next time you're in London, perhaps visiting the British Museum, take a moment to imagine what would have existed in its place some 400 years ago. There, in a tent, staked into the muddy ground, the legacy of the freak show would be taking its first shaky steps into the annals of history, where it would walk, often unsteadily, but always defiantly, for centuries to come. The Sideshow's golden age, unveiling the dark sparkle of 19th century American oddities. As the tendrils of dawn broke over the American frontier, the canvas circus tents also unfurled their wings, and so did a peculiar and enduring facet of American entertainment, freak shows. The 19th century was a cornucopia of change. The Industrial Revolution mechanized the world, and yet, paradoxically, the appetite for the human oddity reached an unprecedented peak. A cultural melting pot and an open landscape seemed to offer an equally expansive canvas for the bizarre and the extraordinary to stretch their legs. It was 1842, and New York City became home to Barnum's American Museum, an establishment that was one part human menagerie, one part exotic zoo, and another part theatre, altogether a kaleidoscope of curiosities. But the human element was the ultimate spell that Barnum cast over the audiences. One of the most extraordinary acts was Charles Sherwood Stratton, better known as General Tom Thumb. This diminutive dynamo, standing only 25 inches tall when he first performed, was a prodigy of performance. He danced, he acted, and he even mimicked Napoleon. It wasn't just his size that captured hearts, it was his larger-than-life personality. And who could forget the 1844 meeting with Queen Victoria? Thumb had everyone in the court enraptured, even managing to get a chuckle out of the usually composed Queen. Barnum's museum was an odd jigsaw of human narratives. There was the bearded lady Annie Jones, who at the tender age of 5 had a beard that would put most adult men to shame. Alongside her was Isaac W. Sprague, the living skeleton, who, despite eating voraciously, never weighed more than 90 pounds. It wasn't simply a display of physical eccentricities, it was a carefully choreographed theatre of humanity, seasoned with just enough exoticism and intrigue to keep the audiences clamouring for more. But Barnum was hardly alone in his endeavour to give stage to life's curiosities. The dime museums that sprung up in this era were popular attractions, curated by impresarios like Levi Lyman and Colonel William F. Cody, yes, the Buffalo Bill himself. These venues often featured people like Jojo, the dog-faced boy, born Fedor Jevtchu, who suffered from hypertrichosis, giving him a face covered in thick hair. Jojo's exhibition included a fantastical narrative, painting him as a savage from the wilds of Russia. Stories like these captured the imagination of a populace enthralled by both Darwin's theories of evolution and the possibilities of the Wild West. Then there were Chang and Eng Bunker, the original Siamese twins conjoined at the chest. Hailing from Siam, now modern-day Thailand, they symbolized the global reach and exotic allure that Barnum's acts often embodied. But here's the twist. By the time Barnum featured them, the Bunker twins were already celebrities, having toured for years. They were savvy businessmen in their own right, who had negotiated savvy contracts and amassed a tidy fortune. In hosting them, Barnum merely added another layer of varnish to an already polished act, rekindling public interest with his unrivaled knack for storytelling. They retired from showbiz, bought a plantation in North Carolina, and raised families, all while conjoined. Barnum's shows were not mere exhibitions, they were narratives. Each act had a story, often embroidered with Barnum's unique flair for the grandiose. Sideshow performers, to some degree, were celebrities of their time. And while the industry was rife with exploitation, it was also a realm where some performers turned their physical differences into financial independence. Quotes like, "Every crowd has a silver lining," attributed to Barnum, underline the period's strange interplay of opportunism and exploitation. And so, in a century steeped in scientific progress and moral questioning, the American freak show stood as a testament to the society's complex relationship with difference. Mark Twain, the great chronicler of 19th century America, observed, "Truth is stranger than fiction." In this era, it was as though life sought to outdo art at every turn, rendering the strange as an everyday spectacle and making celebrities out of those society would otherwise shun. As the tent flaps closed behind you, you couldn't help but wonder, was the sideshow a mirror held up to America? Or was it America that was the grandest show of them all? The grand illusionist of humanity, P.T. Barnum's Alchemy of the Odd and the Ordinary. Amidst the fervor of 19th century America, a time when the country was still stitching its identity together, emerged a man who knew how to weave gold from the strands of the unusual and the everyday, Phineas Taylor Barnum. Dubbed the Shakespeare of advertising, Barnum was a man of towering charisma, and his indelible fingerprints on the freak show phenomenon redefined not just entertainment, but also how America saw itself. In the very spirit of Barnum's own aphorism, "The noblest art is that of making others happy," he delivered, albeit in ways that would spark impassioned debates for centuries to come. You might ask, how did Barnum manage to pull the strings of public attention so effortlessly? Part of it was his genius for what today we'd call public relations. He wrote anonymous letters to newspapers, describing the so-called disgusting exhibitions in his museum, knowing full well that this would only fuel people's curiosity and send them in droves to buy tickets. Barnum was also not above hoaxes and fakery. Remember the Fiji mermaid? Barnum presented what was likely a monkey's torso sewn onto a fish's tail, making the rounds as a mermaid caught near the Fiji Islands. A fantastic tale, absolutely. True, not in the least. But as Barnum famously never said, but is often attributed to him, there's a sucker born every minute. Despite the controversy surrounding the exploitation and ethical considerations of his acts, Barnum's influence was transformative. He leveraged newspapers, exploited the telegraph, and used posters and flyers to build anticipation for his shows. His performers, too, enjoyed a share of fame and fortune that was unthinkable for people with physical abnormalities just decades earlier. So, as we sift through the layers of time and sensationalism, peering into the lens that Barnum held up to America, we witness a reflection teeming with contradictions, much like the man himself. A purveyor of both dreams and deceptions, Barnum etched a legacy on the American psyche that transformed the other into something oddly familiar, inviting the nation to wonder, to question and to gawk, forever blurring the lines between the spectacle and the spectator. The sirens of the sideshow, the indomitable spirits and stories of the women who defied norms. Picture a world of glittering stages and hushed audiences, a world where difference is not just accepted but celebrated. It's here, beneath the canvas tents of yesteryear's freak shows, that a group of remarkable women dared to flaunt their individuality. In an age when women were often sidelined, these sirens of the sideshow took center stage, their lives becoming the stuff of legend, myth, and often deeply poignant truths. Let's journey back to the late 1800s, a time when facial hair was the exclusive domain of men, well, almost. Enter Annie Jones, known as the Bearded Lady, one of P.T. Barnum's illustrious gems. The Virginia native was discovered by Barnum when she was a mere infant, her bearded face a result of hirsutism. But beyond the beard lay a woman of considerable activism. She later became an advocate for the differently abled, railing against the term freaks. Then there was the enigmatic Julia Pastrana. Dubbed the Ape Woman, she was born in Mexico and afflicted with hypertrichosis, her face and body covered with hair. But Julia was more than her visage. She was a captivating singer and dancer. Tragically, her tale took a darker turn. She was often exploited even in death, her embalmed body displayed for years. Juxtaposing Annie and Julia was Myrtle Corbin, known as the Four-Legged Woman, born in Tennessee with 2 separate pelvises and 4 legs due to a condition known as dipygus. Unlike Julia, Myrtle found a more supportive atmosphere working for P.T. Barnum, where her unique physiology was displayed, with a tinge of sensationalism, yet rooted in scientific curiosity. And oh, the bewitching story of Josephine Clefoulier, another bearded lady who crossed the Atlantic from Switzerland to join the spectacle of P.T. Barnum's menagerie. Her full beard was so convincing that Barnum even challenged naysayers to prove she wasn't a woman, thereby turning skepticism into an event itself. The kaleidoscope of sideshow wonders wouldn't be complete without the Hilton sisters, Violet and Daisy. These conjoined twins took vaudeville by storm, their nimble fingers dancing over piano and saxophone keys, even capturing Hollywood's attention in Todd Browning's 1932 film, Freaks. In contrast, Frances O'Connor, the living Venus de Milo, born in the late 19th century without arms, charmed audiences not by what she lacked, but by what she could do. Whether it was sewing intricate patterns or painting delicate watercolors, Frances did it all with her feet, her infectious spirit capturing hearts. No less captivating was Cuckoo the Bird Girl, born Minnie Woolsey with Virchow-Seckel syndrome. Her ethereal presence, accentuated by feathered costumes, would later be immortalized in the film Freaks, a surreal pinnacle in her unique life. Then came the daughter of Grady Stiles, the head of the Lobster family. Born with ectrodactyly, like her father, she too performed, her claw-like hands a symbol not of disability, but of an inherited legacy. In this wondrous tapestry, Betty Lou Williams found her spot as well. Born in Georgia in the 1930s with a parasitic twin, she would become one of the most financially successful sideshow performers, her earnings sending her siblings to college. Finally, consider Mademoiselle Gabrielle, the half-woman, born without a lower half, yet who carried herself with such grace and elegance that she stole the spotlight walking, yes, walking, on her hands. Each of these women inhabited a world that was as much a crucible of prejudice as it was a stage for acceptance. Their lives, each a compelling act in the grand drama of human diversity, painted a portrait not just of physical anomalies, but of resilience, defiance, and the eternal allure of the strange and beautiful. Masters of the marvelous, the men who wove oddity into artistry, step inside the mesmerizing, paradoxical world where men became legends, not in spite of their abnormalities, but because of them. They were the masters of the marvelous, the men who defied medical textbooks and social taboos, each in his own indelible way. Take, for instance, Grady Stiles Jr., or Lobster Boy, whose fingers and toes were fused together like claws due to a condition called ectrodactyly. Hailing from Pittsburgh, Stiles became a headliner, turning a family legacy of disability into a circus spectacle. But his life was also a darker tale, fraught with violence and tragedy, like the twisted plot of a Southern Gothic novel. Across the stage walks Isaac W. Sprague, the living skeleton. He defied the nourishment of food, his body refusing to gain weight due to an undiagnosed condition. In the mid-1800s, this Massachusetts native chose to work for none other than P.T. Barnum. Here's a curiosity. Despite his frail frame, Sprague was noted for his strength in performing chores that required lifting. The spectacle becomes global with the appearance of Lalu, born in India, with a parasitic twin protruding from his chest. This fascinating individual took his act overseas, joining the ranks of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. A cultural ambassador of sorts, Lalu used his platform to educate Western audiences about his homeland, often dressing his twin in traditional Indian garb. Who could forget Joseph Merrick, forever immortalized as the Elephant Man? Born in 1862 in Leicester, England, Merrick's life was a cruel blend of isolation and spectacle until he found sanctuary in London's Whitechapel Hospital. Though deformed by what's now thought to be Proteus syndrome, he possessed an intellect and sensitivity that compelled the likes of celebrated surgeon Frederick Treves to document his life. Segue to Schlitzie, the man-child with microcephaly, his small skull and limited cognitive abilities making him one of the most memorable faces in Todd Browning's film, Freaks. He was said to have had a delightful demeanor, endearing him to audiences and co-performers alike. And there was Prince Randian, the living torso, born in British Guiana without arms or legs. It was said he could roll cigarettes with uncanny skill, lighting them using only his lips. His life was a testament to human adaptability, a living challenge to society's narrow definitions of ability. Shift your gaze upward, way upward, to Johan Pettersson, the Icelandic giant. Standing at 7 feet 8 inches, Pettersson was a Nordic legend. His colossal frame toured across Europe and America, making him a celebrity of towering proportions. Not far behind in height was Alchemy, who reached an incredible 8 feet 4 inches. He and his wife Jeannie formed the billed world's strangest married couple, a harmonious union of opposites, she with no legs and he a giant. And then there was Frank Lentini with 3 legs, a man who transformed his extra limb into a pulpit for inspiration. An Italian immigrant, Lentini took his act across America, speaking to crowds not just about the curiosities of his physique, but about the endless possibilities of human potential. Don't leave without acknowledging Jack Earl, another giant who reached the towering height of 8 feet 6.5 inches. The Texas native became a star with the Ringling Brothers, and even landed roles in Hollywood. He'd always say, being tall is an asset once you step over the shock. Lastly, marvel at Felix Whale, the Elastic Man, whose skin could stretch to astonishing lengths due to Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. He was a human canvas of flexibility, pulling and twisting his skin in ways unimaginable, all while touring with circuses across the United States. These men, each a cosmos of curiosities, were far more than the sum of their physical traits. They were entertainers, thinkers, and above all, performers who spun gold out of the straw of human difference. They were the true masters of the marvelous, echoing down the corridors of time, reminding us that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are written on the body. Fringes of stardom, the inner theatres of freak show performers. In the gilded shadows of carnival tents and amid the aroma of popcorn and cotton candy, a world within a world existed, a domain of those whose bodies were their resumes and whose souls were often an afterthought. Yet, it's essential to pause and reflect on the experiences of these unique artists who resided at the fringes of stardom. Annie Jones, Barnum's famous bearded lady, embraced her unique facial hair as a path to empowerment. Born in Virginia in 1865, Jones was whisked away to join Barnum's American Museum at just 9 months old. She used her platform to challenge society's views on gender and beauty. The irony is rich. Annie, who was taught to knit as a lady would, broke down the very stereotypes that her performance ostensibly promoted. Her beard wasn't just facial hair, it was a manifesto of self-expression. Across the Atlantic and through the gates of time, we stumble upon Joseph Merrick, known to posterity as the Elephant Man. Living in London during the late 19th century, Merrick was the epitome of duality. Exploited by unscrupulous managers, he eventually sought refuge in London's Whitechapel Hospital, under the care of Sir Frederick Treves. Here's a curiosity. Merrick loved to build intricate models of buildings with his deformed hands, as though crafting a world where he could fit perfectly. Treves's journals indicate that Merrick never considered himself exploited by the hospital, seeing it as a sanctuary where he could escape the merciless gawking of the streets. Myrtle Corbin, the four-legged woman, presents another compelling tale. Born in Tennessee in 1868, she had a condition known as dipygus, resulting in 2 separate pelvises and 4 legs. Initially recruited by Barnum, she later joined the Coney Island Dreamland sideshow. Corbin married and had children, openly talking about her intimate life to challenge society's preconceptions about her body. She saw her time on stage as a platform to advocate for those with differences, to show that life's mundanities could be just as extraordinary when navigated through an unconventional physique. Schlitzie, who appeared in Todd Browning's 1932 movie Freaks, had a rather peculiar bond with the director. Browning, having spent considerable time in circuses, offered Schlitzie a semblance of familial love and inclusion. Schlitzie himself could hardly articulate his experiences due to intellectual disability, but it was said that he enjoyed the applause and engagement with audiences, seeing each performance as a shared moment of human interaction, transcending the bounds of speech and cognition. And in the echoes of fame, we find Grady Stiles, the lobster boy. Born into a family of several generations with ectrodactyly, Stiles viewed his deformity as a legacy rather than a limitation. It was a rite of passage in his family to join the sideshow circuit. Despite his violent tendencies, his role as a performer was not viewed as exploitative within his own narrative, but as an affirmation of familial identity. An extraordinary note to consider is the language they used. These performers referred to themselves as freaks, co-opting a term meant to degrade them and instead wearing it as a badge of rareness and marvel. As Francis O'Connor, the armless, living Venus de Milo, once put it, "I am different, but I have made my difference my strength." Under the marquee of morality, the ethical spectacle behind the curtains. Imagine a time before the glow of smartphones and the hum of digital screens, when oddities and curiosities found their stage under the canvas of large, ornate tents. The freak show, as it was popularly known, walked the razor's edge between spectacle and scandal. Yet, it remains one of the most morally contentious forms of entertainment, and this ethical tightrope has always been trodden with bare feet, leaving marks difficult to erase. In the heart of the 19th century United States, P.T. Barnum was crafting his empire of wonders. He knew how to turn societal prejudices into tickets sold. He gave the public Chang and Eng Bunker, the Siamese twins connected at the chest, inviting audiences to speculate on their daily lives, their intimacies, and even their morality. But beyond the surface, here were two men who'd found a way to live a shared life, owning land and marrying sisters. They navigated their duality within a society that couldn't conceive of their unity. Barnum, however, was unapologetically commercial. The public appears disposed to be amused, even while they are conscious of being deceived, he once stated, glossing over the question of whether amusement could excuse exploitation. Ethical questions swirled around these shows like flies to honey. It was Charles Dickens who wrote of his 1842 encounter with General Tom Thumb, a 25-inch tall marvel managed by Barnum. "He is the smallest dwarf I ever saw, and very sprightly. Whether it's right to take him from home is quite another question." Dickens brings us to the crux of the dilemma. Does the performer's willingness, or even enthusiasm to participate, negate ethical concerns? Into this arena entered Henry Trengrouse, a British writer and social critic who, in 1885, publicly condemned freak shows as exploitative and humiliating, arguing that they catered to the most morbid curiosities. Yet, even as these concerns were raised, performers like Annie Jones spoke out against such judgments. She rejected the label of exploitation, believing her stage presence to be a form of advocacy. "I'm not your bearded lady. I am Annie Jones," she declared, rejecting society's penchant for reducing her to a mere oddity. It's equally tantalizing to remember that some performers managed to turn their unique conditions into personal fortune. Betty Lou Williams, born with a parasitic twin, used her earnings to send her siblings to college. The ethical waters get even murkier when economic empowerment is considered. After all, for many, it was a rare path to financial independence in a world otherwise hostile to their very existence. Freak shows also captured the attentions of academics and physicians. Dr. James Morris, a 20th century physician, described his ethical struggle upon visiting a 1932 freak show, musing, "It made me wonder about the nature of humanity. Are we any different, gathering in white coats to study deformities in sterile rooms?" The walls of medical institutions, it seemed, were just another form of tent canvas. While activists in the 20th century, such as disability rights advocate Judy Chamberlain, pushed for the closure of these shows, citing them as inhumane and degrading, it's not clear-cut that the performers would unanimously agree. Schlitzier, for instance, lived in a nursing home after the decline of the freak show era, but it was said he missed the stage terribly. From canvas tents to silver screens, the spectacle's afterlife in popular culture. Picture it, a dim-lit theatre in 1932, its audience tucked away in velvet seats as they anxiously wait for the opening scene of Todd Browning's cinematic Odyssey, Freaks. On screen, a carnival of real-life sideshow performers unfolds, shattering the mores of the time and provoking a collective gasp that reverberates through the decades. Browning's audacious experiment was only the tip of the iceberg, for the allure and discomfort of the freak show have found refuge in the arts, imprinting themselves indelibly into popular culture. Why did freaks strike such a chord? Browning, who began his career as a carnival performer, dared to humanize the freaks, and dehumanize the so-called normals. The film was met with initial revulsion, banned in the United Kingdom and re-edited for squeamish American audiences. Yet in time, it gained cult status, influencing a myriad of artists from David Lynch to Angela Carter, who in her novel Nights at the Circus, 1984, explored the intricate world of a winged trapeze artist named Feathers. In 1959, Ray Bradbury took a literary sojourn into the curious universe of sideshows in Something Wicked This Way Comes. His eerie carnival was a metaphorical stage where humanity's virtues and vices were exposed under a gothic spotlight. The freak show characters, notably Mr. Dark, the illustrated man, crystallized the human dilemma of desire and consequence, a theme weaved into the fabric of many works that followed. But let's fast forward to the 21st century, where the tradition of the freak show receives a makeover in the widely watched TV series American Horror Story Freak Show, 2014 to 2015. Creator Ryan Murphy transported viewers to 1950s Jupiter, Florida, rekindling the carnival flame but inverting the narrative. Here, the freaks were the heroes, the protectors of their own enclave, a statement that echoed Browning's but with a more explicit charge of activism. Performers like the Bearded Lady, played by Kathy Bates, and conjoined twins Bet and Dot Tatler, played by Sarah Paulson, breathed new life into an age-old genre. They were descendants, albeit fictionalized, of the Annie Joneses and Chang and Eng Bunkers of yesteryears, embodying a defiant stand against the voyeuristic tendencies of society. Even music has felt the echo of the freak show's drum roll. Take the smoky voice of Tom Waits, who in his 2002 album Alice gave us songs that dabbled in the theatre of the absurd. Tracks like Tabletop Joe, about a man born without a body, invited listeners into a lyrical sideshow, reminding us that the allure of the strange and wondrous defies simple categorization. An era may end, but its relics have a way of resurfacing in unexpected corners. The pages of comic books like Batwoman feature characters like The Knife, inspired by historical figures like Schlitzie the Pinhead. Meanwhile, video games like BioShock Infinite transport players to floating cities, where propaganda posters mirror 19th century freak show adverts, beckoning audiences to witness the amazing handyman. So, we must ask, what sustains this cultural fascination? It seems the freak show, even in its afterlife, plays to a dual instinct: the desire to glimpse what we fear, and the yearning to understand what we don't. The fading spotlight, when the curtain fell on the big top of Oddities. Imagine a carnival bustling with laughter, whiffs of popcorn, and gaggles of people whispering in feverish excitement. Here, under tattered canopies, amidst barking ringmasters and lantern light, lies the tent of wonders, the freak show. For decades, from the golden age of P.T. Barnum's mesmerizing humbugs in the 1800s to the smaller, seedier tents of the early 20th century, these exhibitions attracted throngs of the curious and the incredulous. Yet, the ink on the banners began to fade, and one by one, the tents folded away, swallowed by the sands of shifting morality and public perception. By the mid-20th century, the bright lure of the freak show had dulled, tarnished by a newfound societal awareness that questioned the ethics of the spectacle. Sociologist Robert Bogdan, who delved deeply into the history and criticism of these shows, argued that the enterprise was a way of responding to human variation that is framed as entertainment. And so, when psychiatrists and activists began to frame it as exploitation, the nails were already being driven into the coffin. High-profile personalities like Harry Houdini began to take an ethical stance against freak shows. Houdini, despite his friendship with acts like Oofty Goofty, a human pincushion act, found himself increasingly uncomfortable with the sideshow realm. The rise of the civil rights movement, along with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, began to challenge discriminatory practices, subtly extending its arm into the arena of freak shows. Change rippled through international waters too. In 1951, the United Kingdom passed the Indecent Displays Act, an obscure legislation with a dramatic impact on what could be publicly exhibited. Although not designed to target freak shows, it certainly became an anvil on which the final blows were struck. With legal barriers and social scorn, the spotlight shrank, casting its last tired beams on tattooed men and bearded women. Media also played its role in this tectonic shift. While films like Todd Browning's Freaks had paradoxically humanized and vilified its characters, the medium of television became a hearth around which society warmed its hands, encountering medical curiosities in a context of scientific examination rather than voyeuristic thrill. Shows like Ripley's Believe It or Not and Medical Mysteries offered clinical narratives that almost medicalized human oddities, distancing them from the carnivalesque to the clinical. However, what should not go unnoticed is the irony of it all. During the heydays of the freak show, surgeons like Dr. James Marion Sims, the so-called father of modern gynecology, were conducting horrific experiments on slaves, inflicting untold suffering in the name of science. Yet it was science and morality that would eventually douse the sideshow's footlights. Dr. Sims's statue in New York was not removed until 2018, a staggering lapse in societal memory and ethical consistency. The surgeon's scalpel and the sideshow's demise, a double-edged affair. In the grand theatre of human curiosities, medical science played a confounding role, part savior, part executioner. As the 20th century dawned, medicine itself was in a period of dazzling metamorphosis. Surgeries were becoming less fatal affairs, thanks in part to the revolution of anesthesia, first used in the 1840s, but reaching more sophisticated iterations by the 1900s. Likewise, the realm of pharmaceuticals offered new hopes for treatment, with milestones like the discovery of insulin in 1921 for diabetes. But what did this mean for the tent dwellers of the freak show, the men and women whose anatomical anomalies had been elevated to entertainment? Perhaps one of the most visceral examples lies in the story of Joseph Merrick, widely known as the Elephant Man. Discovered by surgeon Frederick Trevis in late 19th century London, Merrick had severe deformities thought to be due to Proteus syndrome. It was Treves, wrapped in the medical zeitgeist, who took Merrick under his wing and offered him sanctuary at London Hospital. A curious dynamic unfolded. Merrick's life, steeped in objectification, was drastically changed by a medical institution's intervention. The ethical tone of this narrative was a harbinger of things to come. Concurrently, as techniques for treating conditions like cleft palates and limb anomalies improved, the public started asking a disturbing question. Were the marvels they were paying to see capable of being cured? And if so, was it ethical to keep them on display? The Siamese twins, Chang and Eng Bunker, who lived in the 19th century, might have been surgically separated in the 20th century. Their liver was fused, yes, but they had separate circulatory systems, a critical factor for successful surgical separation. Should they have been billed as wonders when wonders could be medically undone? Juxtapose this ethical rumination with the popularization of psychology. Sigmund Freud's theories of the unconscious had exploded into the public sphere, framing conditions previously considered mere oddities as subjects for medical exploration. The dialogues were changing. Words like neurosis and complexes seeped into daily lexicon, reframing how society viewed individuals with conditions that were both physical and psychological. This gradual shift began to turn the tides against the golden age of freak shows. In the 1930s, when antibiotics like Prontosil made their debut, the death knell sounded faintly in the background, barely audible over the jazz music of the era, but resonant nonetheless. Dr. Harry J. Hazelden, a Chicago-based physician, ignited a firestorm in the early 20th century when he advocated for the euthanasia of disabled infants, a view horrifyingly perverted in Nazi Germany's Action T4 program. In the United States, Hazelden's views were widely condemned, yet they marked a moment where medical ethics and societal values collided, a collision that eventually contributed to the dismantling of the freak show as a cultural fixture. Perhaps the advent of plastic surgery epitomized this evolution most starkly. Techniques refined during World War I to treat disfigured soldiers had civilian applications by the 1950s. Had Grady Stiles Jr., known as Lobster Boy, lived in an era where surgical interventions could have addressed his fused digits, would he still have been a sideshow act? And so, as science pressed forward, as ether gave way to more advanced anesthetics, as psychiatric theories found form in actual treatments, the sideshow tent seemed increasingly anachronistic, a time capsule from a less enlightened era. The scalpel and the microscope, those dual icons of medical progress, cast new light upon the canvas walls of a fading spectacle. And within that light, questions danced, questions that tugged at the conscience of a society on the cusp of a new understanding of the miraculous and the exploitative. Wonders beyond borders, the global odyssey of human marvels. As the dusk-tinged lights of P.T. Barnum's circus tents dimmed in America, the flickering glow of oil lamps cast eerie silhouettes against tattered canvases in distant lands. You see, the spectacle of human curiosities, the so-called freak shows, were not confined by the borders of the New World. Each corner of the globe had its own iteration of the sideshow, weaving a curious tapestry of human marvels, each unique to the culture and times they inhabited. Journey east to the dime museums of Japan in the early 20th century, where a man named Kokichi Mikimoto drew throngs of spectators, not for bodily anomalies, but for the wonder of cultured pearls. You'd think Mikimoto would be on the shores tending oysters, but his spectacle captured the Japanese imagination. These dime museums, or misemono, featured everything from technological marvels to human oddities, delicately balancing tradition and spectacle in a country veering towards modernization. Then set sail towards India, the enigmatic land where Lalu, the man with a parasitic twin protruding from his chest, originated. Lalu wasn't a unique case in the Indian context. India had a long tradition of street performers, bahurupis, who'd masquerade as gods, animals, or oddities. Their performances were more than just entertainment. They were considered a form of social commentary, tapping into ancient epics and folklore. India's relationship with the abnormal was complex, a blend of superstition, religious beliefs, and burgeoning scientific curiosity. Now, imagine crossing the Mediterranean and landing on the cobblestone streets of Paris. It's the Belle Époque, the period between the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and Europe is obsessed with Orientalism. The Exposition Universelle, held in 1889, showcased the Jardin d'Agronomie Tropicale, a human zoo, an even more disturbing facet of the sideshow spectacle, where individuals from colonized regions were displayed. This European variant of the freak show had a veneer of scientific inquiry, but was tainted by imperialism and racial prejudice. And let's not forget the phenomenon of theatre anatomique in early modern Europe. These were dissections performed for a paying public, usually featuring the corpses of executed criminals or, on rare occasions, medical anomalies. Rembrandt's famous painting, The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolaus Tulp, captures such a moment: curiosity, education, and spectacle in a single frame. We wander through these disparate landscapes, each with its own unique lexicon of wonders and horrors, and yet the essence remains strikingly universal. It's as if human curiosity is a constant, a North Star guiding us through divergent cultures and times. Perhaps Goethe put it best when he remarked, "People are so inclined to set themselves at odds with the abnormal." The definition of abnormality may vary from one latitude to another, from the Edo period in Japan to the streets of Kolkata, from the salons of Paris to the makeshift tents of Barnum's American extravaganza. But the impulse to stare, to wonder, to recoil, and sometimes to understand, is as human as the curiosities that we put behind glass or spotlight on a stage. Mirrors and screens, the evolving spectacle of modern marvels. The curtain never really closed on the freak show, it simply transformed, slipping into new skins, splashing its colors onto more contemporary canvases. As the tattered tents of yesteryears receded into the pages of history books, the marvels and curiosities found new stages, from neon-lit boardwalks to pixelated screens. The air still tingles with the electric charge of human curiosity, but it carries a different scent, a blend of nostalgia and digital immediacy. Let's time travel to the 1970s, to New York's Coney Island, where a man named Dick Zegan ignited the modern sideshow revival. Zegan, a Yale drama graduate, found his calling among sword swallowers and fire eaters. At Coney Island, USA, Established in 1980, the credo was freaks, wonders, and human curiosities, but it was a celebration rather than an exploitation. "We're not a freak show, we're about self-empowerment," Zigun proclaimed. He rubbed shoulders with legends like Melvin Burkhart, known as the human blockhead, passing down secrets like sacred texts. Now fast forward to the dawn of reality TV in the late 90s and early 2000s. The spectacle transmuted into shows like Ripley's Believe It or Not, hosted by Dean Cain, and the pop culture phenomenon Guinness World Records Primetime. These shows didn't just feature individuals with peculiar talents or physical attributes, they turned them into overnight celebrities. Chris Walton, known for having the world's longest fingernails, found herself not in a sideshow but on the glossy pages of the Guinness World Records and on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Speaking of Oprah, let's not overlook the talk show circuit, where human interest stories often serve the same purpose as old-school freak shows, inviting us to gaze upon the unusual and extraordinary. Phineas Gage, the 19th century railroad worker who survived a metal rod passing through his skull, would likely have been a talk show sensation had he been born a century later. Instead of a pitchman shouting, "Step right up," you'd hear the dulcet tones of a host saying, "Up next, a man who defied all odds." And oh, the spectacle isn't limited to television. Cue the entrance of YouTube, where channels like Special Books by Special Kids give a platform to individuals with unique conditions to tell their own stories. No longer narrated by a showman, they take control of their own narrative. The concept of agency has shifted dramatically. Gone are the days when Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, had little choice but to let others define his story. Today, he would have vlogged his life, in his own words, for an audience of millions. Let's swirl all this together and pour it into the goblet of modernity. Here, you have a concoction that's equal parts unsettling and empowering. Is it exploitation or exhibition? Is it still a freak show if the freak is also the showman? George Bernard Shaw once mused, "Life does not cease to be funny when people die any more than it ceases to be serious when people laugh." Similarly, the freak show does not cease to provoke and puzzle, just because its stage has changed. As the virtual curtains close on our exploration through the labyrinthine world of freak shows, from the sawdust floors of P.T. Barnum's grand exhibitions to the pixelated stages of YouTube, we're left in the haunting glow of a spectacle that never truly ends. It shapeshifts, reinvents and re-emerges, often in places we least expect. Remember, it was P.T. Barnum himself who coined the immortal words, "The noblest art is that of making others happy." As we dim the lights on this uncanny theatre, ponder this. Isn't life itself the grandest freak show of them all? A ceaseless cavalcade where we all, knowingly or unknowingly, play our part as both spectator and spectacle, seeking an understanding of what it means to be beautifully, tragically, unforgettably human. So here's to the marvels, the misfits, and the misunderstood. May their stories continue to captivate and confound, unsettling the boundaries of the normal and the extraordinary as we collectively dance in the eternal circus ring of life.